You are now tuned into Flippin' the Birds, a Philly Sports Network podcast.
What's going on, Eagles fans? Welcome all to episode 146 of Flippin' the Birds. I'm Brian Cameron alongside Zach Chavalella, Eric Reese, and Morgan Burkett. And we're live. 7-0, dominant win over the Steelers. Short week going into the Texans. Trade deadline happened today. How are we feeling, guys?
I'm feeling fantastic. I know we didn't have any action today on the trade deadline, but I really don't think that we need to. I think we're pretty much set and ready to rock and roll.
Mm-hmm. John, I feel like back in high school we used to have like hot lunch days or something like that. And you're that one dude. There's always that one dude who got better lunches from home than the hot lunches. So he didn't even get the hot lunch. He just packed it. His mom packed him a nice ass lunch. That's what I feel like. We didn't need to do anything in free agency, man. We're already stacked up. Enjoy your hot lunches. Enjoy fucking, the Dolphins can enjoy having Bradley Chubb down there. Like we just didn't need that. We don't need mortgage picks and all that stuff. Like, it's just a good feeling, man. Like sitting pretty. We got our addition early on the free agency. Like this was nice for me to check my phone and not be like, okay, where's that Alshon Jeffrey acquisition? Where's that trade? It was nice. Nice little free agency.
Yeah, I have to agree. And you brought up the Dolphins. I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit later in the show. But it's everything. When you parallel the Eagles and the Dolphins, and I feel like there's certain things that kind of connect those two teams. Obviously you look at the Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, so on and so forth, Tua, Jalen Hurts. But to be in a position where you got the right pass rusher, which I think both teams got the right pass rusher for what at the stage that they're in. Getting the more experienced guy in Robert Quinn was huge for Philadelphia. Getting a guy who can continue to develop with the team, I think, was the right move for Miami. But we gave up a 4th round pick, understandably, considering the age difference and everything such as that, as opposed to what Miami gave up. And Miami gave up a 5th round pick for Jeff Wilson, which I think is a good deal. But when you look at all the picks that they had sent out within the past year, you're talking about really just trying to play Madden with that team. And there's still questions. Tua has answered a lot of questions. There's still questions about Tua. So if I'm going to be making all those moves, I'd like to feel a lot better about my quarterback. In Philadelphia, we feel a lot better about our quarterback, and you see we don't have to make those moves. So for me, I know that there is already a great feeling about Jalen Hurts in the Eagles organization, but it kind of felt like they were doubling down on that, where they didn't feel the need to get another high-priced player to kind of bail him out, if that makes sense. You didn't see them overpay for Kareem Hunt. You didn't see them try and bring in a Brandon Cooks, something such as that. Players that we, in theory would love to have here, but they're not going to give up top capital because they think they can compete regardless of that. And to me, that speaks volumes.
Mm-hmm. And that's very key, everything you just said. So kind of to backtrack, right? To use this as an example, Sunday we saw probably the best that we've seen Jalen Hurts ever in the Eagles uniform. The guy was pinpoint accurate. He was putting the ball where it needed to be. He had a couple of moments of lapses when he tried to scramble and he just ran into the defense. But other than that, you saw the growth. You saw the kid that was turned into what they consider to be a gadget player, a Taysom Hill, replica to a franchise quarterback within what is technically 3 years. And if I'm Howie Roseman, I'm going into the trade deadline. I'm like, okay, like, what do I really need to get? I have, as much as I was vying for a running back, I get it. I get why they didn't make the move. But if you're Howie, you're looking at, hey, I have running backs, I have wide receivers, I have the quarterback, I have the defensive line. Like, we're good because we could go into the playoffs. We could do what we can do the damage that we're able to do. And if we reach the Super Bowl, great. If we don't, I got that 2 first-round picks going into 2023 where I could retool and re-up and get some youth in this lineup and actually come back better than we were this year. Which, to Morgan's point, that's scary. That's something that we're not we're not used to, because in 2017 they did everything they could to win. And in 2018, you felt the effects of it. It was an aging roster. Guys were more, that were injury prone prior to 2017 were showing that why they're injury prone. Now it's like you have a very young roster. You have a freaking wide receiver who's beyond worth $100 million, beyond worth the picks you traded for him. You have a quarterback that is in my opinion, is rare in the NFL, because there's no other quarterbacks, in my opinion, that really have the stature that he has. The guy has great leadership. He's not prideful enough to put his teammates before him, and it's just weird. It's a different era of Eagles football.
I was listening to Morgan when he brought in the show, and he said hot lunch and all these talk about wide receivers. And I have one question. Zach, where do we stand on this pork?
Dude, we're 10 minutes into the show, not even. All right, so here's
you
what
said lunch. You got me going.
Isn't pork like dinner, though?
It could be lunch.
Not necessarily. It could be breakfast, lunch, or dinner. It's the beauty of pork. So here's where we're at with the Greg Ward conversation, right? So I have yet to see the film that says that I said what Eric said, but that being said, I'm just going to go with it, because I let's just roll with it, right? I
was very, very slow to get the film. Hold on, let me remember to do that next time.
So at this point, we effectively stand, right? If Greg Ward touches this 53-man roster, that is now where we are. If Greg Ward touches the 53-man roster, and now here, Eric, I wanted to pose this to you, right? So I could give you pork shoulder, just a pork shoulder, a picnic pork butt, if you will, or
I can
if you like,
for you,
I can invest this pork. No, I could actually cook a pork dinner for you and a guest of your choosing. So
wow,
you can go either way. You can let me know after the show. No pressure on you. You can let me know after the show.
Whoa.
That's
after
another option for you.
Announce that
on
the live show, and then
I'm not trying to put Eric on the spot. I'm trying to build up a little.
Eric been putting you on the spot for the past couple of weeks. Eric's trying to be on the spot.
I got an idea. I'm not on the spot. Hold on.
What happens if he doesn't make the roster? Is there any?
That's on my mistake. I never said anything, so there's no. There's nothing. I effectively get nothing. I'll be honest with you. I'm not used to coming out on this end of trades. But this is one scenario where I did not negotiate well for myself. But if Greg Ward does touch this 53-man roster, either one pork shoulder or a pork dinner for you and one guest will be yours, Eric.
We could even do a giveaway, Eric.
We should do a giveaway.
1 hour with Eric.
1 hour
with Eric.
Giveaway.
Get the
no other podcast is doing a 1 hour
giveaway.
Dinner giveaway.
We're not limiting you to an hour. If it goes really well.
I am limiting myself to an hour.
All right,
I don't want to take more than an hour to eat pork. I feel like now we're just get redundant.
Also, we gotta keep it real. Like how much pork I'm gonna make. Like I'm not gonna make hours worth of pork necessarily, unless if I make a whole butt, like that'll last people some hours. But if we end up going something like a nice pork loin, something like that, I put a little more TLC into it, it's a little bit more of like your fancy pants dinner kind of a situation.
See, I've successfully taken the podcast completely off the rails.
You completely just
it didn't take long.
This is what happens when Howie doesn't make a trade.
We were doing so well. We were doing.
You think Howie would make a trade for pork? I mean, come on.
Clean hunt for pork.
In
an hour with Eric.
Get Howie on the phone. Maybe he'll be my plus one.
Oh, Harry could be.
There you go.
Remember that challenge out there?
You could reach out. Howie
Roseman needs to get on the chat and accept the invitation.
He seems like a cool guy. He probably enjoys some pork, right?
I think so.
I mean, he makes a bunch of good moves. The pork is a good move, hand in hand.
You would think so. So It stands to reason. So that's where we
stand. Back on the
rails. So, Eric, you figure that out. We're going to move on from pork. So I'm actually going to dip back into something, that Brian, you kind of mentioned, and it was kind of feeding off something I said about Jalen Hurts and how great that he played. But I want to touch on, before we get fully into the Steelers game, is one thing I want to mention that kind of ties into the trade deadline, because you mentioned how badly you wanted it back, or you would have enjoyed it back, I should say. That you're fine how it worked out. But I think Trey Sermon comes out of this deadline a winner. I think that there is just some monicum of belief in his ability. Otherwise, I think that they would have added, another back into the fold. Boston Scott been a little nicked up this year. Miles Sanders, history of being a little nicked up. Obviously, Sanders is running great this year, but you just don't know for sure. Kenny Gainwell, just the oddest development of a running back based on their projections that I've ever seen. And he's been fine, just in none of the ways that we expected. And he's not grown in the ways that we did expect. So I would imagine that Trey Sermon is a guy that they think that they can maybe not lean on, but kind of work into the mix a little bit later on. I mean, is that the vibe that you guys are getting as well, since they didn't trade for it back? We saw Naheem Hines go. We saw Jeff Wilson go. What do you guys think?
I'm curious about it, honestly, because I feel like the lack of shit he's gotten over the past 4 weeks, like, I get it, the first 2 weeks, getting acclimated with the offense, learning the playbook. But at this rate, like, we haven't seen him active. That's it. Like, we haven't. And you've seen Boston Scott active. You've seen Kenny Gainwell active. And I feel like they're missing that between the tackles guy. Now, granted, Sirianni's run game seems to be about opening the holes for the running backs and, wide enough to that the whole stampede can run through it. But I still want to see, like, Trey Sermon's a little bit, at least, like, he's 6 or 7 carries just to, get his feet wet.
Well, it's interesting that, I think you make a good point. I think that the Eagles clearly are comfortable with the backfield they have and are willing to let those guys compete. But it's interesting, and I know we'll get into it more, but in the Steelers game, it was Gainwell who we saw them go to in third and short yardage. And I think, it's interesting you mentioned that, maybe not the development we expected, but there's some growth, and it comes at an interesting and kind of pivotal time of the season where, you're seeing them start to play their best football, and it doesn't go unnoticed to the coaching staff that, when they needed to pick up these short yardage, it was Kenny Gainwell fighting for yardage. And I think Tony Romo was even talking about it on the cast, on the broadcast, where he was saying, like, Sirianni's revolutionized the QB dive, where they're thinking about it in a new way, where they're putting guys behind the quarterback to push the pile. And I think the same is kind of happening in short yardage situations. You saw it with the Colts. They never really had a bigger back until they got Jonathan Taylor, and they were okay letting these smaller backs kind of, weasel their way into first downs unless you're hiding behind these 6'6" linemen. They're 300 pounds and can move. Obviously it's nice to have that back like a Nick Chubb who can put his head down and grind out yards. But on the situation, like, how many times have we seen Boston Scott kind of sneak through one of these holes for a first down? I think that's maybe just a shift in thinking. And I think you're seeing it even with, we talk about another really good team in Buffalo, and, they have Devin Singletary, and they just traded away Zach Moss and got another small running back. Right. So I think there's just maybe a shift in understanding of how those short yardage situations can be picked up, because we've seen the Eagles go to a little more RPOs on those downs and have those slip and those slipper concepts where they're just having someone leak out of the backfield, or having, Dallas Goedert fake a wham and kind of leak, or Zach Pascal's done that a lot too. And so I think there's just like a change in thinking. So I don't think it was wrong of us to think like, okay, maybe that bigger back's the one coming, because that seems to be the missing piece. But I think the way of these bigger backs, unless that's your identity, like the Browns, for example, I just think teams feel like pretty confident no matter who you put back there. It's more about the scheme than the actual players. More about the X's and O's and the Jimmies and Joes, I guess, is the way you say it, right?
I like that. I like that more about the X's and O's than the Jimmies and Joes. That makes it good. Because honestly, I feel the same. Like, I don't think that kind of seeking out and overpaying for Kareem Hunt, like you guys brought up earlier, was ever going to be a great idea. I thought that I was content, I should say, that with Boston Scott. So just seeing him a little bit more often, and it's not one dimensional. Like, the running back has to run the ball. We're so all over the place with our rushing attack. It's why the scheme is fantastic, and you kind of can do more with a lot less. So I'm perfectly fine without making the moves, like as you guys are kind of were saying.
Yeah, and the thing I would say, as far as when they start to work in Trey Sermon and Morgan, you kind of mentioned that short yardage, it's not necessarily about the player so much as the scheme, and they did work in Kenny Gainwell with the Steelers. I think they're going to continue that as the season goes on. I think that when you see or start to see even more Kenny Gainwell, and you start to see Trey Sermon is more so in the winding down of games that are already out of reach. So
For sure.
Especially as the year, goes longer and, the months get colder. So, once you start looking towards, perhaps, the later games against the Giants, the Bears, I mean, even the Colts now, which is just in a couple weeks from now, or I guess 3 weeks, that's a game that I wouldn't say I was necessarily worried about it to start the season. It definitely looks even more attainable to finish that game with a win now. So that's probably a game where, you're up 2+ scores, fourth quarter, grind out the clock. We've seen the long drives before. Jalen Hurts is absolutely a part of those drives. Do not get me wrong. But that being said, you're able to kind of lean on those backs, let them, I don't want to say take the beating, because that kind of, you're giving them opportunities to grow at the same time, so it's kind of a win-win-win. So that's probably more so what you're going to see, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Like I'm just kind of thinking back to the Super Bowl run in 2017. You had two bigger backs, and I guess Jay Ajayi played the role of the more speedier, athletic back. And when did we see LeGarrette Blount? Well, it was a lot on first down. A lot of his big runs were just on first down or second and medium and stuff like that. And they just kind of let him run, because one thing is LeGarrette Blount had that pass blocking ability. So, they don't always key run, but I think the Eagles are getting to a point where they're not afraid of showing what they're doing. They'll run a QB sneak and it looks exactly like a QB sneak, and then they'll do it and it'll work. And same with all those RPO concepts. So I think that there's an opportunity regardless to get Trey Sermon in, because you want to see what he can do, right? If he's that bigger back, are the Eagles going to target a running back in the first couple rounds, even if Miles Sanders leaves? With what you're seeing like happen with Najee Harris, I don't think that's plausible. Like I don't think like the age of first round running backs and taking chances on them is having a resurgence. I think Miles Sanders was a second round pick. We see all these running backs that are third and fourth round picks do their thing, right? And so I think that even like Damian Pierce, like all the rookies this year, I guess ATN was a first round pick, but just something I don't see it happen. So what you're really trying to find is can Trey Sermon do it, and do we need to spend like a fourth or fifth on a running back, which is a good question to have answered 6 or 7 weeks in the season. And so if it hasn't been answered yet, you have a few more weeks. But yeah, man, get him in. I'm all with you, Zach. Like, might as well do what you can do.
To see your point of view about this. Just a thought. With Brent Covey not being the best returner right now, I mean, granted, he's a rookie. Takes time to develop that confidence back there. Would you plug Boston Scott back there, bring Trey Sermon in, and bring in Trey Sermon? I mean, my key thing about this, we know Miles Sanders is not good at pass blocking. Kenny Gainwell is not good at pass blocking. Boston Scott's not good at pass blocking. I mean, down the stretch, don't you think having a back like Sermon, I haven't seen him pass block, I haven't seen the tape on it, but having a back there, bigger body back to help Jalen. We've seen the offensive line collapse, quite a bit in recent weeks. But having that back there and using Scott more in the return game and Sermon more in the rotation, like, would it be more beneficial come play time for the Eagles?
It's never a bad time to activate your depth, right? Like, see what you can do in whatever sense of the word. Again, like you said, I probably should, but I haven't seen him pass block much, and it's just as a younger back, it's probably not likely, unless he's already known for that he's gonna give you much until he's in his 5th or 6th year. That's kind of just the way it goes with pass blocking. It's a tough thing to learn, but it's a harder thing to be great at. Mm-hmm. But shit, like, get them on the field. That's the nice thing to have. It's like one of these problems where it's like you got a chest full of riches. Like,
would you activate them for Houston?
You gotta try on all the chains, right? See how they fit, right? So, might as well get them going, right? Like, if Boston Scott wants to return a few, it's not like Britton Covey's giving you a whole bunch. And I think it was Zach that brought this up maybe last week or the week before. But if they just blocked for the guy, it might look better, right? Like, they're just not doing a good job on specials right now blocking. Like, how many times is he catching the ball and getting hit right away? Yeah. So I don't know if it's not really a knock on Britton Covey, but at this point, Boston Scott just being 5'6" or whatever he is might slip under some of those tackles. You never know, but get him going.
I would say probably more so situational with that. We've seen Devontae Smith kind of go back and feel, one here, one there, stuff like that. Personally, I would feel a little bit better if you kind of put Boston Scott in that role. Obviously, he's not as explosive in the return game as Devontae Smith, so the reward is definitely lower, but the risk is much lower as well, should anything happen. But that's the other reason I don't necessarily think that Scott replacing Covey's within the plans, because if something were to happen to Scott,
Right.
God forbid, well, now you have Sanders, Gainwell, and Sermon, and it's all because of a completely avoidable case. So
who's going to put up 200 yards
against that?
Giants, right? Who's going to put up those
Exactly. You have 2 games against the Giants at the end of the season. You're going to need Boston Scott. That's just a fact.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say about Trey Sermon, so he was a talented pass blocker in college. Does that mean anything at the NFL level? Not necessarily, but it bodes well. And as far as his time in San Francisco, in a Shanahan offense, I mean, who can really tell? There's so much with the rotation of the backs. There's no consistency. So it's anyone's guess. I think, Morgan, you're right. It's kind of like there's no definitive, yes, he is good at the NFL level. No, he's not. But again, I think that's part of the importance of kind of inking in a little more and more as the season goes on. And to your point, Brian, you talked about, Houston. I'm expecting Houston to be a blowout, if I'm being flat honest with you. There's no reason it should not be. So for me, second half, Trey Sermon, Kenny Gainwell, I think it's definitely a possibility. So
you might as well if you're going to have Gardner Minshew out there as well.
You might as well. Well, that too. We had Minshew just in this past game, so we were already seeing saving the starters. Now, this week was a little bit different, because you're going into the short week off the bye.
Right.
There's a lot of strategy involved with that. Love exactly how the coaching staff handled that, by the way.
Yeah.
But it is still kind of the framework that you could go with going forward. They had a relatively early bye week, so you're going to want to preserve these guys as much as possible heading into the postseason. So I could see scenarios where it happens. I'm not going to replace Covey for Scott full-time, though. That's kind of my thing.
I absolutely think that, just like how you were saying, that the reserves will be coming in this game against the Texans on Thursday. As far as saving the players and just getting them all the time that they can, just to not be in the game, to not risk any sort of injuries. It's a fantastic idea, especially when you are, kind of blowing out this competition. You have an easy schedule throughout pretty much the rest of the season. So, if you're completely healthy come, playoffs, and you're pretty much this unstoppable when everybody is available to play, take them out, in the fourth quarter from here on out if you need to, if you're up by as such.
I would even say probably more likely than kind of replacing him with Boston Scott. And this is my, I guess, conspiracy theory. We may not have seen the last of Devin Allen. I'm just going to throw that out there. We don't know what the future holds. I'm just going to throw it out there. So if this really doesn't work, if there's, say, an injury to Covey, which again, hopefully not. This team has been relatively healthy during the season. You know what's coming that way. No, I know, baby.
I know who's coming.
Never in a million years. Yeah, Devin Allen, exactly who's coming in. So I know Devin Allen will come in. And we'll see what he can do. And the thing is, I wouldn't mind adding Allen regardless of what happens to Covey, just because watching him as a gunner during the preseason, that was huge.
I thought he would make the roster because of that. It made all the sense in the world to have him on the roster. How great he was filling that role.
Well, I also thought that there was a slight chance that we might see, Gouget Hill kind of come back for that same purpose. But the fact of the matter is, he's been too productive as an actual linebacker this season for that move to make sense for him. So Arizona, I believe, snatched him up.
Yeah,
that makes sense. But I would still like to see some move on the special teams from within, because I think it's possible. I think it's there. And I think there's definitely improvement that can be made. So whatever the way is, if it's through the returner, if it's, by adding a gunner, or just kind of just replacing guys here and there on special teams, they need to coach it up. They need to possibly make a small internal move. That's the kind of area, and this is a great problem to have, is that this is the one that we're nitpicking about, to where I'd like to see a little bit of improvement. I definitely think it's possible. So we'll see what happens, but I think there's going to be a lot of experimenting in the next coming weeks.
I think I definitely agree with that. And then, to no disrespect to any Houston Texans fans that for some weird reason listen to this podcast, I feel like we may just not be. We may be in a position where we don't waste too much time on the Texans matchup. I'm sure that we all feel like it's going to be a pretty big win by a wide margin. So what I kind of want to dive into is we hear the Eagles week in and week out say that they have yet to play a complete game. Um, I think they played an outstanding game against Pittsburgh. What Jalen and AJ were able to do and just be consistent with it on all those drives was phenomenal. They scored in the second half. They looked like they played almost a complete game, but it just feels like there's something missing with this team. So with the trade deadline here gone, just to get your opinions on it. Do you guys feel like the Eagles have peaked yet? I personally don't right now. I feel like there's still more to see, and I feel like that's a very very scary thing for people who are counting them out for some weird reason, counting out the only undefeated team in the league. Um, you have yet to see a game where for example, like Devontae Smith and AJ Brown are both close to 100 yards at the same time, or a game where Dallas Goedert and AJ Brown are dominating, or a game where even Miles Sanders is dominating. You have yet to see a game where everybody's just hitting on all cylinders, even defensively. Um, I mean, does that happen at any point this season? Do you feel like, or does that happen in the playoffs?
I mean, yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you hope in general that your team's not hitting its peak at week 8. So it's a good thing that there's still things to fix and some pretty obvious ones to fix. Obviously, tackling was better for the most part in this game. That was a big red flag. Whereas like the tackling needs to get better. Yeah, and what we saw, and I think like the problem I have with this team was never personnel. I think they have a lot of great players in house, but there's some like mixed messaging happening. You never know what's going on in the locker room. But I was talking about this with Sean, and shout out Sean. He's an avid listener, and we appreciate him and all our listeners. But there's something to be said when your defensive coordinator kind of flips that switch from being super aggressive and then backs off into this kind of off zone. And it's not a bad thing. Like, you understand why he's doing it, and it's been working clearly. The Eagles have had a really good pass defense. Haven't really played any good quarterbacks outside of arguably Kirk Cousins, I guess. But it's the mentality it sets, and that's been where we've been kind of having the issues with our tackling. Is our D line's not having any trouble. It's been our secondary when a running back does get through, and it's inevitable. I know you got to stay gaps down, but sometimes the D line's gonna miss or the linebackers are gonna miss, and Kaiser White's been pretty fantastic, and TJ Edwards has been fairly, again, pretty solid. But
Edwards actually got yelled at by Reddick in that game.
Right. So, and the problem is it's just that mentality. It's like we're going to be forceful 2 out of 3 plays on this drive. You know what I mean? It's just like we're going to be aggressive, we're going to blitz, and then we're going to go play a soft zone. And that's what we see with the defense. Is like they're excellent, and then one play they just shut off, and it's a huge gain. And that's problematic for a team. Like, again, we've been playing these teams that don't really have the talent to capitalize that over and over again. Like, Kenny Pickett's not going to throw out a bomb when the secondary falls apart, but you see them on film. Like, we've seen a couple times on tape where, hey, if that pass rush doesn't get there's a wide open man downfield, and the quarterback might not see him, or he doesn't have time to throw it. But there's these little lapses that I'm seeing, and again, it's just mentality. You have a young core, especially in the secondary. I know obviously outside the corners, but still, those 2 safeties are pretty young. The linebacking core is fairly young. And you just kind of see those plays where they shut off. So that's my biggest concern on the defensive side. And that's just, I think, level of competition. You always see these teams kind of play down to the level of competition, especially young teams. It happened against, we talk about the Bills probably being the best team in the league. We saw, again, like, I know they're playing Aaron Rodgers, but he's not throwing at anyone. They still almost kind of made a comeback late in the game, right? Because, they have a great defense as well, but you kind of shut off, right? And so it's a problem with good, like, it's a problem that's common with good teams, but it's a problem that good teams shouldn't have. And so that going into the playoffs needs to be solved. On offense, I still think, again, like, we talk about it week in, week out. It's just like they haven't had to put up a bunch of points in the second half. They haven't been down. So except for the Jaguars, and again, we're talking about those litmus tests throughout the year. The team that we had the least amount of problems with, in my opinion, is 6-1, right? The Vikings. So, and that they handled the Vikings easy, and maybe that's just because they have their number, because they have over the last couple of years. But like, it didn't give you any challenge. So if that's what the 6-1 teams are giving you, man, like it might be a false positive. You might feel good, but we really need to see if this Eagles team can come back on offense. And I just don't know if they can. I hope they can. I mean, obviously Pittsburgh is a great example. Like shit, just throw the ball deep to AJ Brown. He'll come down with it. But that's not the strategy you necessarily want to have if you do have to come back. So those are my two big gripes on both sides of the ball. But shit, we're 7-0, man. Like, what am I really complaining about?
That's kind of it too. It's like I look at has this team peaked? Peaking would be perfect. Like a team is perfect. I think something that sticks out to me, and you touched on it just a little bit, was getting all the wide receivers in sync together, not just one wide receiver having a big day, because you kind of do see Devonta Smith kind of fade away if AJ Brown is having a career day, just like with Pittsburgh. So once that was firing all cylinders with the rushing attack that we have, then I can say on the offensive side of the ball, this team is peaked, and that's going to be terrifying when it does.
Yeah. Brian, you mentioned peaking during the playoffs. If that's kind of like the ideal time, as it were. And Eric, kind of to your point, when you talk about peak, you're talking about a really lofty level. I think you kind of all three hit the nail on the head with it. Where I don't think this team's peaked. I could not expect myself to say that, considering that we're looking at a 7-0 team. And there are so few holes. But like Morgan said, there are holes, small though they may be. I don't expect this team. I want to separate the regular season and the postseason for a second. I think the hope is that they peak during the regular season. Specifically, they peak during the Super Bowl. I think that is the ideal situation, obviously, right? Or, what does peaking look like? Can they peak and maintain that peak, for instance? That's the other question. So whatever that case may be. But when we look at the rest of the regular season, for me, it's all about December. December is when we see the Tennessee Titans come to town. I think that's going to be a tough challenge, just stopping the run. Jordan Davis probably won't be ready by that game. There's a chance he might, but a guy his size with that kind of injury, I'm not holding my breath.
Just let him rest. Let him rest.
I agree wholeheartedly. Absolutely, let him rest for that game. You don't want Derrick Henry running into him when he's coming off an so Tennessee, that's going to be a bit of a challenge. Similar reasons to the New York Giants in New York, I think is going to be a test. Maybe not the most difficult challenge they face this season. I think it's ignorant to not consider it a test, considering how the Giants have played this year. And then finally, you have the Cowboys in Dallas, right? You cannot overlook the Cowboys, especially now that they have Dak. These are the three games that are going to be coming up towards the end of the year that I'm really focused on. It's not Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, throwing to a bunch of toddlers. It's not the Saints, who may very well have given up on the season by that point. Hopefully they have. I think that's the hope for us having their first round pick. It's how do you get through those teams who, specifically Tennessee and New York, play that real kind of hard, tough style. And then when you look at Dallas, an elite defense, if we're being flat honest. So we need to see that. And let me preface that by also saying, on their home field. Now, maybe in the playoffs, that's not going to matter. Hopefully that's not the case. But you want to see how the team is ready to perform, just should any case arise, or to even give you more faith in how they would perform at home. Because we know the link in Philly, huge home field advantage. So if you can win on the road, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to win at home. So for me, it's those three games that you got to look out for. But hopefully we start to see the regular season peak right around there. Otherwise, I hope to not see any kind of peaking until the playoffs.
I think this is a moment where we acknowledge growth within the podcast. Because 2 weeks ago, I said the Giants would be a tough game. And everybody wanted to take off my head for it and call me a Giants fan. But Zach just admittedly said the Giants will be a tough game. So, I want to acknowledge the growth within the podcast. I acknowledge you, Zach.
Oh,
it's a little bit. It's a little bit different.
Oh no. There's no backtracking here. Hold on, you guys are not backtracking. Time out. Hold on. No, ain't no backtracking here. That's it. We move on to the next subject. You don't backtrack.
Well,
my only point. I'm not backtracking. My only point is that it's different coming from an Eagles fan than a Giants fan. That's my only point. That's my only point.
Before we move on to that point about the Giants, I see that they're 6-1. I'm still like not.
Wait, no, they're 6-2. Right?
6-2, 6-2, 6-2.
Yeah, I
Oh,
mean,
they're
even
6
at
and
6-2,
2? Okay.
they're playing above their
Even
weight,
less
which
intimidated.
I mean,
It's their defense.
it's more about the style, you know.
I'm not
it's
afraid,
a,
man.
It's a big regular season style that kind of focus on the defense and pounding the running game. That I think we're going to terrorize Daniel Jones, if I'm being honest with you.
That's it.
Oh, yeah.
But it's
right
just
there.
that grinding style. That's all.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't sit there and think Daniel Jones is the quarterback of the Giants. That strikes fear into my heart.
But it's not
I
Daniel
can't do
Jones
it.
that's just strike fear into your heart at all. It's not. And I'm not saying that they should intimidate the Eagles, because they shouldn't. But they're a team that for some reason under Daboll they get the job done no matter like how the Eagles are. The Eagles are winning at any way possible. The Giants, they are finding weird ways to win. Saquon is
with much less talent.
Exactly.
Like significantly less talent.
Yeah. Exactly. So it shouldn't be a game overlooked. It should be a game that's considered, this is, don't quote me wrong on this. It should be a game that you consider to be something that you may see in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
A scrappy team that should not have made the playoffs, fighting for their lives against a team that's really freaking good and is coasting. Like those two things right there, you're gonna, you're seeing it early on with the Titans. You're seeing it early on with the Giants and the Cowboys, which as Zach mentioned. So these games, it's a good test to see that the Eagles coaching staff, the Eagles players are not taking anybody lightly. And I'm very intrigued to see these matchups.
And what you said right there kind of parallels the Philadelphia Eagles of last season, I feel like. And what the Eagles need to do is handle them like the Buccaneers did the Eagles in the playoffs.
Yes.
I mean, to the point of like
exactly
mocking the quarterback on the sidelines. Like that is the level of embarrassment that we need to
because right there you're showing that you have that killer instinct. You're showing that
assert dominance.
You are
Absolutely.
that team that everybody's questioning you to be.
Now, Zach brought up a good point that I want to address, and I think that I mean, again, the snaps are going up pretty much every week, but losing Jordan Davis is really big schematically for this defense. Obviously, he's a talented player, but he's the only guy on your team that is truly a nose tackle that can play that zero tech position. So you can bump Fletcher Cox in there, but this is something they went to a couple weeks ago where we started seeing a lot more of that 50 front, where they have kind of like this overhang backer, and then they have like a 40, but really it's a 50. But you had Jordan Davis sitting right there over the center, and that right there, like the fact that he's going to eat up any single double team, which teams have tried to do, and we've seen how that works, and we've seen how that goes. He just stands there in the gap, and that's what you need, right? And then you have Fletcher Cox, Javon Hargrave, Milton Williams, being able to play that 3-tech where they're just a lot more effective. So now losing Jordan Davis, it's probably Fletcher Cox has got to go play that nose tech. Maybe you just don't see as much of the 50 front, but it's been huge in stopping the run. That's what they did against Dallas. And Dallas still ran the football on them, but Zeke always has a great game against the Eagles. But it definitely did slow them down, and especially early on in the game. And then they did the same thing against the Steelers, right? And they went to that 50 front. And I know the Steelers have been having trouble with running the football, but that's one of the things you can't let them get going. And so losing that guy who plays that position naturally, now you got to ask Fletcher Cox to go do that, or you got to bump Javon Hargrave in to do that. It just people, again, just playing a little bit out of position. It's not that they're not capable, but it does take some of that rhythm out of that D-line. And, this is one of those things. And again, we're not going to lose to the Texans, but before I saw their performance against the Titans, and because that was an afternoon game, I actually got the opportunity to watch that game a bit. It's just not a scary offense at all. But Dameon Pierce, great running back, is hard to take down. He's going to make you miss tackles. And so if the Eagles weren't able to contain that run, then he's getting 5 yards downfield, and dealing with our backers and our safeties who just love to lower the shoulder and not wrap up. I was kind of worried, again, not that we lose this game, but again, it might expose some holes on this defense. And now you don't have that natural nose. Maybe they don't even show that 50 as much, but I just think that, like, going forward, not having Jordan Davis is going to be tough. I know he wasn't playing 80% of snaps or even 70% of snaps, but it was a really good look for the Eagles to stop the run. And now you're going against teams where, the Colts are going to want to run it. The Titans are going to want to run it. The Giants are going to want to run it, right? So now it becomes a test, and it's interesting. This team, the Eagles, for being like a cold weather, playing their own stadium in an open stadium, seem a lot like an arena team, the way that they play football. And so that grittiness that you guys are talking about, that run the football and pound it down your throat, we've seen some of it. But going into the playoffs when all their games are at home in the cold weather, they're going to need to find that identity where they can kind of pound the rock and play solid defense.
Yeah, like think about that a little bit. Just missing Jordan Davis. Like Jordan Davis is clearly a phenomenal, defensive tackle, doing what he does, stuff in the run. But in a sense, there's good. I think in my mind, there's great enough depth on the Eagles' defensive line where if he has to miss time, it's almost like having him back as a luxury versus a requirement and necessity.
Fair enough.
So that's kind of the way that I look at it. I don't really think that the Eagles are missing a ton, but they're definitely missing a step, right? Because it's Jordan Davis. So yeah, I mean, I'm again, as you guys were saying a little bit earlier, I'm just kind of hoping to have him back versus Derrick Henry because that's the matchup.
It's a great time to get Robert Quinn, man. It's a great time to get Robert Quinn.
It is, absolutely.
Do you expect them to kind of move Brandon Graham more in?
Pardon?
Do you expect them to move Brandon Graham more inside the defensive line?
In passing situations, maybe, but I don't think for run defense ever. Yeah,
I would think he was
like I would say that's more about the addition of Quinn and less about the injury to Davis, which I know you weren't specifically saying one way or the other. I'm just to lay it out there.
Probably see more Milton Williams would be my guess. That would be where I'd go.
Or Zach's boy. Zach's boy did pretty good.
Dude, listen, right? So I wanted to talk about this real quick, like,
he played well.
And playing off of both Morgan and Eric's points, right? So Tuipulotu, listen, I love the guy. He's been fantastic. He's not a nose tackle, so they're not going to just kind of plug him in there. So kind of to speak to Eric's point, like there is this wealth of depth that Philadelphia has, but he doesn't have the size of a Jordan Davis. So there's a noticeable difference. You're not going to be able just to plug him in as if everything's okay. So I think you're going to see the benefit of that depth, like Eric said. But I think one thing that you said, Morgan, that's kind of key. I think we're looking at a lot less 50 front, which I think is part of the benefit of Jonathan Gannon's, I don't have a scheme,
Right. Absolutely.
Something that people have made fun of in the past, but now you're really kind of seeing an opportunity to potentially reap the rewards of having a variety of different fronts. We have versatile defensive linemen. The addition of Robert Quinn, again, I can't overstate it, is huge. I don't think, we had a question from Chris Kaufman about Quinn at D tackle. I don't think that we're going to see that, especially with the D tackles that we have. I think Philadelphia, really likes that. And again, I think Brandon Graham on occasion, when you look at some sub packages in passing situations, but Quinn on the outside. But I think you're going to be looking at a lot of coaching around the players you do have, as opposed to trying to put, a square hole into or a square peg into a round hole, I should say. So that's again the beauty of. I wouldn't have said this at the beginning of the year. The beauty of this defense is just the variety in it, and it really was a matter of not just a matter of it, there were things that he could have done better last season as well. But the personnel really does show that it matters so much in this defense. And now that we have that personnel, do I wish Jordan Davis was healthy? Absolutely. I feel much better going to battle with him, in that lineup every day. That being said, there's a way to get through this. This is not a season, for the Sixers. For the Eagles, it's not a season-ending blow for them. We're 7-0. The offense is fantastic. We've two of the most elite corners in football this year. And on top of that, we have just an absolutely versatile, athletic, should be pass rushing fiend now with the addition of Robert Quinn, with a nice, versatile defensive coordinator who can kind of bring out everybody's strengths, or at least hopefully. So I think you both really kind of hit it. It's the depth. And on top of that, it's just the variety in the packages that they can run. So I feel as good as I could losing Jordan Davis for about 6 weeks.
And with the loss of Jordan Davis, that just means that Greg Ward is going to be returning punts.
Dude, put Greg Ward as nose tackle. I mean, they could try that. I really can't imagine him trying to stop Derrick Henry, but
It'd be a sight.
It would be interesting. It would be interesting.
So we are at the 7:52 mark, and usually, we do go an hour long, but Zach and Eric, they do deserve to see this World Series matchup between the Phillies and Astros.
Oh yeah.
So I don't want to rob you of that glory, even though my team was robbed of that glory because they just couldn't perform. But really
Giants?
quick, wow.
The Giants don't play baseball.
Giants
Well,
crap.
actually, they do in San Francisco. Dang, never mind.
Anyways, really
you know
quick.
what? This is one of my favorite times of the year to watch. Oh, I mean, obviously, I should say favorite times of the year. I like watching the World Series and MLB playoffs. But man, like I just go back to your point in a second. Kind of get towards what you're talking about, Brian. You segued on the way to the Phillies real quick, and I just wanted to bring up you being a Giants fan and all that the San Francisco Giants fan, because that's what I'm going to say in terms of baseball, that you're just like the people that I have a rivalry with. Smash Mouth, the band Smash Mouth. They got mad at me.
I forgot about this.
They got mad at me for calling them out because they were like going on Twitter and saying, "Oh, it's BS that the Phillies got Bryce Harper because the Giants were supposed to be on Bryce Harper when they got him originally." Now look at them. They were like, "Oh, he's overrated because they were salty." Now look at him. Now look at Bryce Harper.
They got Jock Pederson. What were they complaining about? That's pretty much the same thing, right?
He's not Bryce Harper and he's not in the World Series. Listen, you could be a Giants fan and be salty. All you want, Brian. You're a Giants fan in two different worlds. You're just like Smash Mouth. Somebody once told me that Bryce Harper is in the playoffs. That's what I gotta say about it. I'm sending this to Smash Mouth. I ain't forget.
Up that to World Series.
That's fair. Facts. Facts. World Series. You hear that? Hear that guy from Smash Mouth?
Just for that, we're gonna extend the podcast another 15 minutes.
I'm gonna bail because
3-hour podcast.
It'll be on
a 3-hour podcast.
I just had to bring that up. I just had to get that out there in the universe. That's all.
Yeah.
God, I feel good. All right.
You gotta talk your shit, Eric. You gotta talk your shit. Are we doing predictions? This is gonna be a tough one.
Predictions, but at this point, I think you guys think I'm gonna predict the Giants game. I don't even know who the hell they're facing this weekend.
Well, you should.
Yeah, you should know.
You're a bad fan.
Anyways, I mean, I'm pretty sure we all can assume it's gonna be a blowout, a win. But yeah, sure.
Yeah,
let's do score predictions.
I mean, I got one ready to go. If you guys,
I'm ready to go.
All you, baby.
Actually, here it is, right here. As a matter of fact, Ben Jay's got it. That's my prediction.
I mean,
back to back.
I'd be offended if the Texans scored 14 points.
I will admit, I'm not far off. I'm thinking 34-17.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's a very confident win. I do think the Texans are going to get their licks in. I think Damian, Pierce is going to have a great game, and he's an up and coming running back. I got to say, and this is really just don't draft a running back early. Like, I don't mean to talk to Giants and trash, Brian, but like, just don't draft a running back early. Like, that's I think what the lesson you have to learn at some point. So for me, 34-17.
Okay, how are you feeling, Mark?
Man, I want to say they hit 40, to be honest. I think this defense doesn't have teeth, man. Like the Eagles should be able to put up points. Just seeing the way Jalen Hurts threw the football, it just seems like unless you can create pressure up front, and I was actually surprised at the Steelers game how well they did put pressure on Jalen Hurts. I think that was a pretty. Yeah, I think it was a pretty poor game by the offensive line. I think they're going to be upset. I think they're going to come in. They're going to do a fantastic job. I mean, you don't see Jordan Mailata give up, 3 pressures in a game very often. I don't think that's going to happen again. And if Jalen Hurts has time back in that pocket, there's no chance. So I think it's going to be like 41-17. That's my guess.
Okay.
Although it is a Thursday night game, like what's been going on with these Thursday night games? It could be fucking 18-6. Like, I don't know. I don't know, man.
I'll say 28-13. And the reason why I'll say 28-13 instead of the 35-13 is because I believe it's going to be not that competitive in the second half, where you're going to see some reserves coming in, and maybe they don't get that extra touchdown. Doesn't matter. The Eagles are going to walk away with a win, and it's not going to be close.
Yeah.
See, I'm between you and Eric right now because I want to say it's between 42-17 or 42-13, but I do agree with Eric that if they're up 24-0 in the first half, do you honestly like keep your starters in the second half knowing you're just doing that well?
Well, you got a long time off, right? You got.
Oh, that's true. So you do want to get the practice.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, I'm going 42-17.
So Brian, just so you know, so we can do the math, between Morgan and Eric would be 34-17.
Damn.
All right. So you know what? I'm going with that 34-17.
All right, Brian, doubled up.
Just
with me.
because
Right,
Zach did the effort of doing all that, I'm going 34-17.
All right.
And if we get it right, then Eric has to make a nice dinner for Zach.
Okay.
Sure.
Like I'm not gonna. Hey, Zach,
hesitated there for a second.
Yes, Zach, save that video. There's no.
Eric,
there's nothing convoluted there. It's just
He was like,
"Oh man," the look on his face is like, "Why the fuck is this Giants fan talking right now?" Like, come on. Why is
I'll
this
be
guy-
waiting patiently for my Kraft mac and cheese, Eric. No
All
worries.
right.
dinner. Ask Morgan.
All right.
oh, God.
Poutine, let's go, baby.
Yeah,
That'd be some poutine.
we can get some poutine going on. I gotta make it Americanized though. We don't got the good stuff.
Nah, beef gravy. You can make that. From
Oh, I
scratch.
know I can make that, but they got like, oh God, what does New Jersey try to call it?
It's the extra ingredient the Canadians put in their food is called love. You guys should try it.
Oh, I don't have that.
We don't got that in America. That's not a
Passion.
thing.
Passion.
That's what they
That
put it.
exists.
That's what they put in New Jersey. And they call it disco fries. I don't really understand it.
Oh, disco fries, yeah.
Hey man, a lot of love and disco too, eh? So
But anyways, guys, enjoy your Phillies game. We'll see you guys next week for the pod. I'm Brian Cameron alongside Zach Chavalella, Eric Reach, Morgan Burkett, and we're flipping the birds.
Go Birds!
go Birds.